A big thank you, first of all, to the administrators who are here for the work that we're doing to keep schools open and keep us safe. The point of our meeting today is to talk about how we plan to take Byram Hills and create the bridge between our current reality and a time where vaccines are going to be a reality. So how do we make sure that we're keeping kids in school, we're keeping our school doors open, we're confident in the numbers and that it's safe to keep school doors open, and what are we going to do to transcend us safely to that point that vaccines have been widely distributed and have had time to take effect and be effective at keeping everybody safe in our community. I have a presentation to share with you, but I want to also say that middle school, high school is a little bit different. If you have a sixth grader, they're very much acting as, a K through 6 model where they're coming into school every day and they're seeing their teachers every day. If you have a 7th grader through a 12th grader, as you know, we're working on that hybrid. 7th grade through 12th grade parents may be wondering, how are you keeping our kids safe? How are we managing right now where we may have a lot of kids out? A lot of kids who are choosing to stay remote at this time. And how are we going to manage when COVID is over? Like where do we get to that point? So today, the goal of this is to talk about all of that and to talk a little bit about testing. COVID testing, should we go into a yellow, orange, or red zone, is going to be required in order to keep our school doors open. We have not had what we have perceived to be in-school transmissions. Now, when I say that, I do not say that with certainty or authority, because COVID is just sort of like catching the common cold. You're not really sure who caught it first or who you caught it from. So to say that we have never had a transmission is erroneous. But to say that we know for a fact we have not had a child in class with another child when they have been exposed to each other, where those two children have become positive, or a teacher, starting with a teacher case, lending itself to a student case. We have never seen that. So for that sake, we can safely say we have not seen in-school transmissions. What don't I know? I don't know if a child's father is positive. Is that father positive because something the father got outside and brought to that family, and that child is not COVID positive, but perhaps like our kids, these carriers that people talk about? These are the things we actually don't know. So when you hear the Department of Health and everybody talking about the lack of school transmissions, they're correct on the one end. We're not seeing the spread amongst people who are sharing the same spaces. But we really actually do not know what came first in this case, the chicken or the egg. Is the father COVID positive because of the child who's not COVID positive? Or is the child now just in quarantine because the father received it elsewhere? So that's something for science to dictate for us over time. And everything that I'm talking about today, I want to say that I am relying on science. Remember, I'm a doctor of letters and not of science. So I need to rely on Dr. Casaro, our school physician. I need to rely on Dr. Richard Stumacher at Northwell Health and Critical Care, who's been really instrumental. There are a bunch of doctors who are working with me on that stakeholder group who are instrumental in this process, including Dr. Thomas Murray from Infectious Disease at New Haven Children's Hospital, the head of pediatric immunology. All of these people are answering questions for me that are helping to drive recommendations that I'm giving to the board. Board members, I know that we have Mia DiPietro on here. I'm not sure if any other board members are on here. But the board has spent a significant amount of time with me talking about testing and how we are going to satisfy the state testing requirements should they come our way, and how are we going to implement something now to help us get through to later. So if I had to be asked what would be if I had 2 gifts that you could give me, what would they be? The first one would be a rapid PCR test that every single person could self-administer on Monday morning before you came to work in school, so that I could get up in the morning and I could take this rapid test that's non-invasive, that says that is a PCR, that says, Jen Lamia, you don't have COVID. And at that snapshot on a Monday morning, I know that I am not bringing anything into work. And I know that everyone around me has taken that same snapshot before they left their homes. And that if somebody took the snapshot and said, wow, I am COVID positive, they stay home. And since they haven't been in school in 48 hours, they're not requiring everybody else to quarantine because they're then susceptible. That would be my first gift. How do that gift I hope is coming. It received FDA approval very recently. I'm hoping by the end of January, toward mid-February, that may be more marketable and more financially feasible for us as a school district to do. We probably cannot afford that kind of testing as a school district and would need to go out and seek other resources for that. Should that come to pass, we will do it. But that would be the ideal gift number one, is that everybody once a week can at least ensure that they're not bringing COVID into our schools. The second would be that we can continue that until the time in which everyone has not only received a vaccine, but that we make sure that the vaccine is viable and that it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So that said, how do we get from here to there? So I'd like to share my screen with you and just talk a little bit about our quest for this COVID testing to get us across this bridge. All right, you can see that, Tim?
Yep, it's there.
Okay, great. So first, from September 1st to December 3rd, the state of our schools, something that fascinated me was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving when I woke up. I can't even begin to tell you how happy I was. I thought, I cannot believe we are at Thanksgiving and we are still in school. I am so grateful because over those summer months when we were all working very hard to make sure that we could get these kids back to school, we never knew if we could. We just knew that it was our design to get them here. So from September to now, what is our snapshot? We've had 20 students or staff who have been COVID positive, which is less than 1%. 14 resulting quarantine situations. And as I said, we've had no known or suspected in-school transmissions. Our attendance was very, very high. This is Coleman Hill and Wampus. It's very high at the Coleman Hill and Wampus levels. At HCC, if you look at the last two columns for this past last week and then the beginning of this week, I have to get some current data on this, but the expected versus the actual, we weren't really lagging that far behind in the expected number of kids and the actual number of kids. Keep in mind, we are here in a pandemic. You're going to see this a little differently at the high school. Like if you look at the second, on the second, we were expecting 83 students. We had 53, and the day before for grade 12 and grade 11, we were expecting 93 and we had 48. You see that there's less of a gap when you get to grade 9. So sometimes we're going into classes in the high school and we're seeing a few kids in a class. Sometimes we're seeing an entire cohort in a class. And the question about, is this okay? I have to say right now, we have to allow it to be okay. Every single family is facing very different situations. I spoke to a mother the other night who has a COVID positive family member, and that parent had not had any kids in school. They had people who were coming home from college, additional siblings, and they chose to keep the other children home. As a result, we didn't have to quarantine in any of the school situations, but that's a family making a family decision. With the level of robust synchronous remote learning that we have at the middle school and the high school, we have that option for people. And nobody is going to sit and critique your family decision at this point during a pandemic as to what you want to do and what you think you need to do because you have out-of-town guests, et cetera. There are many people, and I had conversations when I met this week with every single one of the faculty in each of the 4 buildings. And I talked to them about the fact that they, if a senior teacher is going into a class and has 3 or 4 kids in a class when you're used to having half your cohort, it's different. It's different for instruction. It's a different experience for the kids who are there. And teachers were saying, like, why aren't the kids coming back to school? Like, should we be doing something differently? And I said, no, we're in a pandemic right now, and we have to respect every individual's choice to do what their family needs to do. If kids are working remotely and they're not participating and they're not interacting, that's a different conversation, but it's not a conversation that we've had to have. So let's take a look at the Byram Hills plan moving forward. When would we have to close schools? We would have to close schools when we did not have enough staff to staff our schools because we have too many staff members affected by COVID or quarantine. We would have to close schools if we felt that there were in-school transmissions and a transmission rate that was in our area that was something that was uncomfortable to us. The state says we could be placed into a yellow, orange, or red zone established by the governor. There are some districts right now that are in the yellow zone, like parts of Sleepy Hollow and Ossining, schools that are in the orange zone, such as Portchester, Yonkers. So different places right now that have gone into those zones. When you're in those zones, you have to do testing. So what I am finding in these area schools that have these zones, and what I'm finding many of my colleagues in other districts are doing, is they are looking to the New York State to help them implement tests that are given to them through New York State. Because what you need to do, these are the red, orange, and yellow zone designations, the bottom line showing you schools, where it says closed and closed for red and orange, we actually could remain open provided we are abiding by the new set of parameters which are in red. If you are in an orange zone, you have to test 20% of in-person students, faculty, and staff over the course of a month. If you're in a red zone, you have to test 30% over the course of a month. Now, what does this testing look like? From the state, it looks exactly like the testing that you see if you drive up to one of the Department of Health drive-ups. You've got people in PPE with nasal swabs who are doing not the interior invasive nasal swab, but an anterior nasal swab. What these schools are doing is their faculty or staff or nurses or athletic trainers are taking an online training in how to administer those tests. Why conduct tests of students and staffs? Two reasons. First of all, if you go into a zone, you have to. Second of all, why conduct it? To have some sense of surveillance testing. Is what we're thinking we're seeing in schools actually happening? Are we going to take these tests and find that if we test 10% of our population per week, that we're really not having COVID cases in that? Or are we finding that we have a lot of cases? This is good data for us to know as a school. So why not just use those free New York State tests if we're in the yellow or orange zones? I have quite a few reasons. First of all, the New York State tests are not PCR tests. They are rapid antigen tests. They have a high percentage of false negatives. Two, you may have some user error in having people who are performing those tests and you're not really sure if the specimens they're collecting are the correct specimens they should to make that test effective. The third reason we're not using the free New York State tests is because they're not free. You will have to either sacrifice some school time to have people come to do a drive-through, or you'll have to backfill a lot of your own staff to be able to perform these tests and interrupt instruction of students while you're conducting these tests. So instead, we are looking at a company called Miramis. Bob Shaps, who's the superintendent of Mamaroneck, and I have been partnering throughout this process. Between the two of us and sometimes together, we have interviewed over 24 companies who offer testing, whether it is anterior nasal swab testing that is self-administered at home, or whether it is saliva testing that is administered at home. We have selected a company called Miramis who does the saliva PCR testing. Over other companies, we liked what they were doing because the saliva tests are not like the tests from last summer. I remember watching my two college-age students doing the saliva test last summer, and it was like they were trying to fill a bathtub with saliva. It was such a large tube. This is a very small tube, requires a few expectorations to get it filled. It can be filled at home. It is brought to school. Your child is kept anonymous, except for our school nurse, who will have a QR code connecting that particular sample vial to your child. We will bring them to a lab in Brooklyn to expedite the process to have them done. And within 24 to 48 hours, we should have our results of a PCR testing. They are pool tested, but the pools by the end, if they have a pool and somebody in the pool is indicated as a positive person, they break the pool into sets of 2. So at the end, we will know one of these 2 people is COVID positive to maintain the anonymity. And then we as a school district will tell those 2 people that they should go for testing because they are the 2 final in the pool that indicated that one was COVID positive. How will we facilitate this testing? Julie will set up these kits. She will administer them to students to take home on January 5th. Kids will come back with their saliva on January 6th. We will run it right over to the labs in Brooklyn, and we will hope to have our results by at least that weekend. This, to me, makes me feel better than a bunch of people lining up, students lining up to have anterior nasal swabs where everyone knows who is having a test at the same time, et cetera. And also just the complication of not getting those tests right. So our proposal to the board was to contract Miramis for 1,824 tests. That's going to give us 10% of tests for 8 weeks starting in January. We can renew that contract with Miramis. Another reason we would like to contract with Miramis is because that day that those self-administered PCR tests that are rapid tests that can be done in your own home comes out, I know that Miramis will be one of the companies in the forefront of receiving them and being able to distribute them. So we're hoping to engage in this relationship with Miramis now to satisfy our 20 or 30% should we go into any one of these zones and remain open in school, and also to foster that relationship so that we can move to the next step when we're ready. So December, we're just waiting for the need to test students and staff as per the DOH. I am hoping we don't go into a yellow or a red zone between now and the December vacation, but knowing that you have to test a certain amount within a month, we may still be able to remain open even if we're designated a zone from now until December break. January 6th, to begin the surveillance testing process of 10%, we are going to be sending out surveys to parents, to consent forms to indicate, would you like to consent to have your child receive a saliva vial, take it home and bring it back the next day and be tested in pools so we can achieve our 10% numbers. If you are not agreeing to it, I'm not sure, when the state says we have to, should we go into one of the zones? I will find out more specifically from the state as to whether or not those students are allowed to sort of opt out of this. I would imagine they might be. So I will keep you updated on that as I learn it. So we're waiting for board approval of the Miramis contract. We have notification to staff and parents next week, including electronic consent forms. I'll have a little video attached showing how the test is conducted, having these superintendent coffees and faculty meetings. We're going to identify cohorts for testing, and it's going to be staff and students. And then I'll probably need some volunteers to coordinate these kits for distribution. They don't come assembled, where you have a little baggie, you have a little vial, and you have a little alcohol wipe and a little direction sheet. So we'll have to try to coordinate that to get some of these kits together. That made it cost effective for us. I must also note that there's a neighboring school district that is going to be using the free New York State tests. They hired out a company to come in, like a lab, to come in and administer those free tests. After negotiations with Miramis, the cost to us is $1 more per person for a PCR self-administered saliva test at home than it is for this other district to hire out a company to come in and facilitate the free tests. So the pricing differential, to me, it just didn't make any sense. Of why we wouldn't have it be less intrusive for children. Keep in mind, we do have 5-year-olds and we're not going in swabbing the interior of their noses. So our current goal to establish this contract and relationship with this reputable testing company. Miramis tests all of Wellesley Public Schools in Massachusetts. That's over 5,000 students alone. They test many private schools in our area. I would say Mamaroneck and Byram Hills are the first two public school districts to move forward with this company in this area. Meeting the New York State Department of Health. We're going to continue to monitor attendance and these COVID-19 numbers to make sure that we are still safe to be in school. Our future goal is to wait for that PCR rapid test to be done every week and taken on Monday before arriving at school for those who are willing to take it. COVID-19 vaccine, once we see a reduction in numbers due to that vaccine, which I'm hoping will arrive in like April, May, June. But remember, it will take time to seed and to, have its value and effectiveness. Then by that point, at different measures, we'll see if we see positive rates anymore and if we even need to continue any kind of tests. So our next steps, as I said, the Board of Ed adoption of the contract, this timeline for testing, a notification, which I'll send out to the public next week after the board meeting. We'll have some more Q&A sessions if needed, collect consent forms, distribute these vials, and then number 7, hope for speedy and efficient PCR rapid self-administered tests to carry over us over that bridge to the vaccine for everyone. So I did a lot of talking, a lot of sharing, but at this point, I want to open it up to anybody who may have some questions. I think for our purposes, if we're going to have to test, so we're saying that we're going to throw 236 people a week into a quarantine for 24 to 48 hours until we get the results. And what Miramis is telling us is that they're not seeing these high numbers in schools. So in effect, think of it this way. This is the way I rationalize it. In our schools right now, with people being 6 feet apart, people being masked, people in large areas not even have to quarantine necessarily if they're not within a 6-foot vicinity of the person who became COVID positive. I am forcing a lot of healthy people potentially into quarantine when we're not showing that they're even getting it in this environment. So that would be my answer to why we're not doing it. You know, it's different than when you're in college and these kids are living in dorms and they're all over each other, or in apartments that they're not wearing masks, right? So they're all going about their areas. It's a very different situation when we're sending kids home and we're having them in school. A parent asked a question, but what if we absolutely do not want the test and/or vaccine? I will tell you that until the Department of Health, if the Department of Health tells me you have to, or you have to be remote, then that would be the option. If the Department of Health says you have to have the vaccine or you have to be remote, that would be the option. But that would never be something that Byram Hills would mandate. So we will go on a voluntary basis until they tell us if we have to mandate it. They may even tell us, they may even admit defeat and say, please get a 10% per week testing, or 20% in a month, or 30% in a month of voluntary people who are testing. I mean, they may tell us that, but for now we're going with who is willing. And hopefully I have a lot of kids who will expectorate into a tube and bring it in.
Jen, I received a direct message question. It says, if a child is still testing positive weeks later, are they allowed to return to school?
Yeah, at some point, like if I've had COVID before and I think I'm testing positive, you can actually go to your doctor and, see, are you expressing the antigens for this? And is there a place for you to come back to school? Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to keep you in quarantine forever on a negative test. So speaking of quarantine forever, there's a lot in the news right now about the CDC changing their quarantine orders from a 14-day order to a 10-day order if you're not tested, but some sort of release after 7 days if you are tested. Just so you know, while the New York Times and everybody else has broadcast this, the CDC has not changed their website. So we have to go by what the current CDC guidance is, and the New York State Department of Health says that they don't always necessarily completely follow the CDC, but that they will look at that guidance once it comes out and make the determination if we switch in New York. In which case, the guidance would be changed for New York. And if anybody is on a current quarantine, potentially that could be lessened. We do know from our own experience in schools that we were not seeing anybody in quarantine from day 10 on who was having issues. So I do think that they're right in reducing it to the 10-day quarantine, my non-science perspective. Any other questions?
Another question there, Jen, do you see?
I don't see them, Tim. So maybe you're getting some and I'm getting some. So
this one is, if you are selected in the testing pool, does that mean that you test every week or randomly throughout the semester or only the one time?
So it would probably be the one time. If we're going to do 10% of the population at a time, I think that what we're going to do is break it up into cohorts of 10% of the population. So you would probably test 1 out of every 10 times. Now, if you said you wanted to test and I had a smaller pool of people willing to test, perhaps it could be more than once in that 10-week period.
Mm-hmm. And I had a direct message about the sensitivity of the test and specificity of it. So I'm guessing that's the accuracy of the test?
Yeah, which is a 97% accuracy, which is what you want in a PCR test.
Right.
And the interesting thing that they do with the pools and the data privacy is something that intrigued us about Miramis. So remember that I said that Miramis does not ever have your information. Now, by law, they have to hang on to your saliva. Can you just imagine what that warehouse looks like? But by law, they have to hang on to the saliva for everybody who's putting their tests in there for, I believe it's like 90 days. But there is no defining connection to the saliva that is there to your child. The only person that will know that will be Julie Gallagher, our nurse, who will be assigning, Jess Rosh's son, Max, to vial 9989, right? So he's going to get that. And Julie Gallagher is going to be the one person who's going to know that when the results come in, and how to address that with the parents of the children who come back in the pool of 2 that are positive in the end. No known transmission in schools. You mentioned no known transmission in schools. Our nearby school system saying similar. They're saying exactly the same thing. And even the governor is saying it, but, depending on the day. But no, we're not seeing that at all in Westchester County, this spread. You have your occasional, kids are kids, right? We've been through this at the high school. They go to a party and then they start dropping like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them together who have all been together and all been in the same cars and all been at the same party. And not party, but small gathering. It just takes more than 2 people to spread, 2 or more people to spread COVID, right? So there were isolated cases like that in different districts, and they're not seeing that anymore either. I think people are calming it down. All right. So other questions. Will there be guidelines for return to school after break? Can a family volunteer to test in order to get back into school buildings? So we will not start the tests until January 6th. We'll distribute them on January 5th. So we will have been back by then. But I would recommend if you're doing any kind of traveling, you stay home for those first 4 days. While you're doing that quarantine, you take the test 3 days before you leave the forbidden state that you're going to, and then you take the test 4 days after you come home. Very similar to what my kids did at college. I would recommend that for your families. Do the testing results need to be from your contracted provider, or will you accept results from an outside lab? So we had to get approval for this particular testing to be valid for New York State. Again, I got a question about what if you choose not to take the vaccine? The vaccine will always be a Department of Health issue and not a school issue. Like the vaccines that you have to take right now to be in school, we don't mandate that. That's New York State Department of Health. So if they mandate it, then you have to have it. If they don't mandate it, then the school can't be requiring it.
And Jen, someone is asking if other household members can access the testing with Miramis separately from the student pool testing.
No, so we can't take other, moms and dads. I know that there are some like for lack of a better word, concierge services. I know that there are a couple of families in the school district that are having everybody in their family tested every week in a self-administered saliva or self-administered anterior nasal swab. There are companies that do that. I do know that Costco even is selling kits for you to use at home. I had originally ordered for my own son's kits from a company called Pixel, but then I guess they became overwhelmed and they shot me an email saying, we've changed our mind. We're only giving it out if you're symptomatic and with a doctor's note. But that's what I would consider doing for your family if you want to do some home testing every week. I think it's great if you can do it. Are you rolling out the testing regardless, or only if we're designated as a zone? We're going to roll it out regardless. If we get designated as a zone, the 10% every week will cover us for the 20 or 30% if we fall into a zone. If not, it's giving us some data, some good surveillance testing until the day that I am hopeful that we have a rapid self-administered home PCR.
Do you see the questions? Have you heard of cases post-Thanksgiving, or are we too early?
I think we're on the cusp. I think we're a little bit early, but I think if we get some post-Thanksgiving cases, we're going to be getting them soon. We're not seeing a spike. Gina, you would agree, right? Not more than any other time before Thanksgiving.
Not yet.
Will next week be when issues from the holiday may show up? Yeah. So if you're looking at, what I would say is I would start counting 7 to 10 days from the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of Thanksgiving, right? So Sunday, if people had out of town visitors and they were leaving, starting to look at 7 days from that point, or 7 to 10 days from Thanksgiving. So we're right on the brink, today being Thursday. I think if we're going to see anything, we're going to see it in the next 4 days or so. Can you please clarify how long students who test positive will stay home before returning to in-person classes? So the interesting thing is, if you test, Gina, you may want to answer this. It's kind of like you're not on a 14-day quarantine.
Sure. So if you test positive, you're actually on a 10-day isolation, and the first day starts when you become symptomatic. So for a positive case, your isolation period is 10 days. And if you're considered a contact, it's 14 days. So that gets people a little confused sometimes, but it should just really create the buffer on either side of that contact to see if your body is incubating the virus or not.
The Coleman Wampus version of this presentation, the person was not able to attend. Were there any significant different information here? Do I need to watch it when it's posted? No, I gave the same exact presentation. The only thing that was different was I talked about the numbers of you have a lot of high attendance numbers at the elementary level. All of those kids are going to school. So that was really the only difference between that and middle school and high school. And just, from an elementary perspective, part of the rationale in talking to the board about this type of testing and not doing the anterior nasal swabs, I can't imagine there are probably ninth graders who it's traumatic, right? Like somebody you don't know who's coming up to you in this costume is going to stick this anterior nasal swab in. If we can avoid that for kids in our community, I want to avoid it. I don't want them to have to feel like, oh yeah, remember when we were kids and we used to have to line up, to have our noses swabbed. Like, I just don't want that to be the reality for our children for a test that is not effective. It is an antigen rapid test that has something like an 83 or 84% accuracy rate. To me, that, it's not like we're talking about 100% or 90 something percent.
I have another direct message. Are there any exceptions to quarantining for kids who already had the virus? For example, if a child had the virus in November and returns to school and then in December they test positive.
So to that end, we're needing to ask regarding HIPAA rights, if we have a right to ask, has your child tested positive for COVID before, so that we can potentially remove them from the pool so that they're not tested in this random sample testing, because we're already understanding that they're going to be red flags. So our goal is to take them out of that. And whether we do it through a consent form, or whether we just say, if your child's taken the test already, can you confidentially tell Gina Cunningham in an email so that we can look to make sure that your child is not tested again, because they will likely, as Jess pointed out, flag positive for us.
And Jen, if the DOH adopts the new 7-day quarantine with negative tests, will you notify us? I currently have a child in quarantine.
ASAP, like we'll notify you that night and by phone. We will let you get your kid the get out of jail free card as fast as we possibly can. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have some teachers who are in quarantine for like the second time. Gina, we have one that was in 3 times, right? Where they just kept, there was somebody that was a COVID positive and they just kept having to go into quarantine. That's a long time. That's a lot of cleaning out of closets and remote teaching. Yeah, somebody asked in the early morning session, what can we do for teachers, administrators? You know, how do we, and I have to say the PTSA put something together for all of the buildings that was a thank you to the staff and the administrators. It was so beautiful. And I think that I said that 2 things that always find their way to my heart is really good food and a personalized message, right? So that personalized message means so much to everyone. So thank you for supporting the teachers during this time. Yeah, I was on a superintendent call today, and a lot of the superintendents were saying that they're struggling in their districts because their faculty and their staff do not want to come to work. I have to say Byram Hills, and, you know, I talked to another colleague of mine after that meeting in another district. We're really an anomaly here. The teachers want to be with your children. They respect the fact that you may be keeping your children remote at this time. They want to come to work every day. Of course, there's like less than a handful of people who maybe would prefer teaching remotely, but I think they might prefer teaching remotely on a regular day without COVID. So just know that the intention by the faculty and the staff is there to be with your kids every day. And I'm not hearing that from my counterparts in other districts. And I think that that is speaking volumes about the community that we're serving in, about the families and the support that we're receiving from the families to do this work and the appreciation for being in. I think that we're small and that helps. And I think that we have longevity. We have a lot of teachers and administrators and staff members who have been here for such a long time. We're invested in this community and we care about the community. And I think that that makes a big difference. Remember, I've been here since I was 21. I am now 52. Chris Walsh, how many years have you been here? 18?
18.
Gina, yeah. Gina, how about you?
16.
16. Tim came in 2000.
21 years.
21, right? I mean, like, we have it. Kim Lapple, you came here when you were a little girl. How many years have you been here?
18, same as Chris.
Yeah, Angelo and I used to teach together at the middle school. I don't know what you're at, 25, Angelo? He doesn't even know.
Jen, you're depressing us. This is such a good meeting. Let's stop.
I'm 22. I'm only 22.
You're 22. But that's great, right? But that speaks volumes. That Angelo didn't even know how many years. That's what we're facing, right? That's good. So anyway, we're behind this. We want to make this work for your children. We want them to have an experience that they couldn't have anywhere else. And we want to care for them. And we do care for them. So thank you for all of that support. Adam asked, can we help teachers in the queue? I like that, in the queue, or staff in the queue. I think if you know that they're in the queue, sending them a message, thanking them, because that's so serious. That's dedication. Great.
They always pick up their ViewSonic and run home with it under their arm.
Yeah, they do.
Sometimes we're all there helping them with their stuff.
Yeah, Adam, I would say, that's a really good question. I think can you help with food? I think if you happen to have one of your kids' teachers who's in quarantine, you may want to ask that. They may need that. All right, I think that's it, folks. Now, I say this all the time. You know that we're at any time tonight or tomorrow or the next day, you can pretty much find all of these administrators in the same spot they're in right now doing the same kind of work. So if you have questions as a parent, please call us. Don't think it's something that's too small. I've had parents call me with, it's like workshopping, we're in this together. And if you're in a situation with your kids and you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, or you're struggling because you feel like your child is not being as social, or you're struggling because, you know, your child is kind of like spending a lot of time alone, whatever these situations are, you really have to call Colleen or Kristen, or Angelo, Kim, Chris, me, Gina, Tim. We're here as resources. I've been watching kids grow up and raise my own children for 30 years, right? So we don't always have the right answers, but we're pretty good people to workshop that with. So I don't want you to feel alone as parents during this time, because you're watching your kids go through a day and a week and a month that you wouldn't necessarily have wanted them to go through, right? You wanted them to have a normal time. You wanted them to have their friends and go to these social occasions and live a lot differently. You know, we're finding these silver linings, but as parents, don't feel bad if you're struggling with this, and you have confidential people who would be happy to talk you through that. So workshop it with us. Thank you, everybody. Be in touch with us if you need us. We're a call away, okay? Thank you for trusting your children to us. Mia, thank you for being our steadfast board member on all of these calls, and to all of our administrators here for doing this great work. I appreciate you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.